Welcome back. My name is Matt Reiners, and I'm the co-founder of Eversound, which was recently acquired by Uniguest, a company committed to developing engagement technologies to help communities connect and improve quality of life for older adults. Today, I'm joined by my friend Heather Easterling, Senior Director of Program Services at Sunrise Senior Living. Heather is a certified therapeutic recreation specialist and has been a life enrichment director, an activities and volunteer coordinator, regional director of memory care and programming, senior director of engagement and program services, and now in her current role as senior director of program services for all of Sunrise. I've gotten to know Heather over the years. She brightens up any room that she walks into. Her take on resident programs and really the opportunities and the possibilities is inspiring, and I applaud all of her efforts for it. So thank you so much, Heather, for joining me today.
Oh man, those are really kind words. Wow. Thanks. Thanks, Matt.
Of
I've
course.
been looking forward to this because you are just a blast to be around. Every time we're at a conference, I'm like, I want to hang out with that fun guy right there.
Well,
Um,
I appreciate that. Yeah, my wife and daughter might say different, but I like to think I'm fun. So yeah. So Heather, I shared a little bit about your journey, but I'm curious if you can share a little bit of your background and how you got into senior living.
yeah. All right. So I'm going to take it way back. So my mom was a physical therapist. My dad worked with kids with that were at risk and counseled those guys and families. And so I definitely grew up in a household that was very service oriented. There was during my teenage years, if I got grounded or did something maybe I wasn't supposed to, my mom would make me work with her during the summer sessions for physical therapy, like HIPAA therapy. We would do pool therapy and things like that. And it was like the best punishment ever, the
Hmm.
best summers ever, the best memories I ever had during the summer times outside of, the other fun stuff, hanging out with your friends. So I loved being around people that just came from all walks of life and had all different types of experiences. And I learned lots of ways to have empathy and to yeah, it was a great childhood in that respect. And then I decided I wanted to go into special education. So I did special education for a hot minute, and then I realized I felt really boxed in. I
Hmm.
it wasn't my jam. So I came out of special ed and found recreation therapy. And I remember when I found recreation therapy, I think I was in line at a Taco Bell or something, and I'm just like looking on, talking to. I was at the time I was taking Tai Chi lessons with a bunch of professors at Radford University in the southwestern part of Virginia, and one of those professors was part of the recreation therapy department, and I hadn't really explored it, but we had chatted it up, and I was in a Taco Bell line getting some tacos because that's what you can afford when you're in college,
Yeah,
right?
of course.
And I just remember thinking to myself, I think I may have found me. Like, there's my profession, recreation therapy. So I signed up, I got into the school, I got into the department, and it was yeah, it was just the perfect match. It's to me, recreation therapy is just it's the full shebang. I can do a little bit of physical therapy things. I can do a little bit of occupational therapy types of things, but like put that fun factor on it, which is great.
I love that. It's so cool you found your calling, right? Like
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
what it
And I haven't even talked about how I got into like senior care, but maybe I can weave that in a minute.
sounds good. And I know when we shared a dinner together earlier this year, you had a very interesting and shall I say correct way of explaining and thinking about recreation therapy. And I was wondering if you can share with your listeners what you shared with me.
Okay. Um, and I don't want to claim that this is like from my head. I'm sure somebody else has said this. It's probably in memes somewhere else, but most people will know physical therapy. Most people will know speech therapy and occupational therapy. Those are the most refunded, Medicare benefits that are out there. So recreation therapy is one of those additional therapies that you can get reimbursed for if your doctor actually knows how to code it correctly and know that the services exist. But recreation therapy is if you put it into the scheme of those other therapies. So occupational therapy helps you to do the things that help you to get out of bed, brushing your teeth, brushing your hair. Physical therapy helps you with the big motor skills, getting your muscles stronger, big range of motion. And then recreation therapy comes into play because we give you that motivation to get out of bed so you can still do the things that you've always loved doing. That makes you feel like yourself. Because when
Mm,
something happens, when you need these types of services, you're kind of rocked, right? You kind of feel like, what am I going to do? How am I going to pivot and still keep living my best life? And
yeah.
recreation therapy helps you to do that. So I think it's extremely applicable in long-term care and working with older adults, because I think sometimes in our very ageist society, we uh, we think that we're going to be young and able-bodied forever, and nothing's ever going to happen to us. And the first the first thing that happens, it can really take a blow to our self-esteem. It can cause depression. It can cause isolation. So recreation therapy to me is one of those things that pulls you right out.
Yeah, I love that, right? Because I think a lot of the times when we think about recreation therapy, it's just as important, right? To be able to do that and finding that purpose and that passion. I mean, that's a life worth being lived, right? If you're able to go and find that. And I imagine in your time, Heather, you've seen the field of recreational therapy evolve over the years. And I'm curious, what trends are you seeing emerging and how have you seen it evolve over those years?
Yeah. Okay. So I think where I'll start with that is when I was a young recreation therapist, fresh out of school, I was very much focused on younger generations. And my youngest rec therapy client that I've worked with was 4 years old.
Hmm.
Um, and now that I'm in senior care and in the senior living industry, longevity industry, um, the oldest person that I've or yes, the youngest oldest person that I've worked with was 107.
Wow.
So I, I think about the lifespan when I think of recreation therapy, and I think about there's lots of different niches that recreation therapists can select, right? Some of us go into outdoor recreation and apply that therapeutic recreation field in that way. So lots of fun ropes course types of things and adapting ropes course types of things. When I graduated Radford University, I came out to Colorado and I worked for the Rocky Mountain MS Center,
Hmm.
the King Adult Day Enrichment Program, which is an amazing program. And it's for younger adults with neurological disabilities. It's for folks that have acquired neurological disabilities that not just MS, for example. So we would do really fun things. We would take them to Breckenridge. We would take them to like do adaptive skiing. We would go white water rafting and figure out how to make those types of really amazing experiences happen for folks that didn't think that they could ever do that again. So I think that there sometimes can be a dip in recreation therapists choosing the older population to work with, because we're when we're trained in recreation therapy, we're trained to do very clinical documentation. And in long-term care, we don't do that very clinical documentation because we work so closely with nurses. And then there's also other coordinators that help with that documentation. So we're looked at more like activity directors. And there's a stigma with that a little bit, right? Like
Mhm.
maybe not quite as important as some of the other operational positions in the big scheme of what we're doing. I do think that that is greatly changing. I can see a big focus on what longevity means, what makes that fun, and the amenities that go along with that. And so I think for recreation therapists in particular, we're more needed than ever
Yeah.
in this industry.
Yeah, I would agree. I think COVID really helped us put a spotlight on that too, right? Because we people were forced to isolation, and we saw the negative impact that was having on people. I would agree with that trend. I'm definitely seeing that too. I think when I first got into senior living, there's a lot of providers who just talk the talk, but weren't necessarily walking the walk. But it
Totally.
seems like the adult children, the residents that are coming into these communities are actively asking about this. And there's so many people that I've talked to that are like, hey, we need to revamp this. We need to start taking this seriously because people are asking for it. And, I think it is such an important piece to the senior living community, a successful senior living community puzzle. And I'm grateful to see that more attention, interest, and energy is being poured towards that, through the workings of people such as yourself. So, thank you.
Yeah, it can be a real profession. I think that people may not see it quite as that, but it could be something you could hunker down and work in it for a long time and grow it. And this is the time to get in. It's
Yeah.
a good time to be in the industry.
Absolutely. And I know one of your other passions is continuing to get your education, which I applaud you. And you had shared with me leading up to this about your recent paper on generational programming and the interests of baby boomers. Sounds fascinating. I think everyone's preparing for them. So how do we, do that? But could you just kind of give us a sneak peek into some key findings or insights on your research?
Yeah, when I research, I'm just reminded that I'm just that older person in a younger body right now, and I'm not really going to change all that much when I'm going to need these services later down the road. And I think the baby boomers are most loudly saying, and so that's why we're all needing to pivot to meet those needs, because I think before we may have been um, programming a lot for old people and our interpretation of what old people is, and taking it back. But when you're thinking about generational programming, you do have to take into account the unique experiences that each cohort has experienced as they were growing up. So right now, the average age in assisted living and even in independent living, some independent livings is the mid 80s, right? So they're considered the silent generation. So they're not even the baby boomers yet. So the silent generation, what was going on during that generation? They're the parents of the baby boomers. They're the ones that experienced, the Great Depression. They experienced the world wars, they experienced the Korean War in a different way, right? So what those kinds of things shape your in some ways are their personalities, and the political time that they were growing up in, they very much they listened to their doctor, they listened to authority, they had great respect for authority. And then their children, the baby boomers, they their respect for authority definitely changed when they are being drafted for Vietnam, right? And so they have this amazing sense of individuality. So think about baby boomers. There's this, they have this tag term of socialized isolation. So they created that term. So they want to be as independent as possible for as long as possible. So sometimes they think of assisted living and independent living as like not the place where they want to be, so they're creating their own kind of isolationism, but being very selective as to where they're going to socialize. So gyms, for example, I mean, they like the yoga classes. They like doing the aerobics. They'll go to the gym to have their socialization. The typical leisure activities that you can think of. That's what I found in the research. And that's why I identified with it so much. They're doing all the things that I remember my parents. My parents are the baby boomers. So they like to do the canoeing, they love to travel, they love to be lifelong learners. They're going to want all of those things, and in a very robust and good quality way. I don't know that some of the like the Daily Chronicle, for example, was every activity professional out there uses it, but I don't know that that's going to fly with a lot of the baby boomers. So
Yeah, it's
yeah,
it's interesting, right? I think
yeah,
when I first got into senior living, it was this idea of the three B's, right? Bingos, birthdays, and Bible study. And
right.
which I know some communities are still doing, which, hey, I don't want to cause any riots or anything like that to happen. But it will be interesting to see, right? And how we're kind of re-identifying that. I'm happy you just didn't say happy hour. That's all you wanted to do, they wanted to do now moving forward. But that's
I mean,
probably,
they're going to want happy hour, and they're going to
yeah, of
want,
course.
some nice fresh foods, and like, yeah, they're going to want those nice pizzas that are made in the courtyards and their nice brick ovens. They're going to want that.
Oh,
Fire pits, all the things.
I love it. Um, and now one of the other things we were kind of like chatting about before this, and one of the things I see being key really in every facet of life, right? It's all about the relationships,
Yeah.
and how we can connect with those around us. And I know there's this big idea around person-centered care and how we can really do this, but I'm curious, how do you go about applying sociological frameworks to programming? How do you approach the understanding the unique perspectives of residents based on their life course and experiences?
Yeah, I do tie it back to some of those cohorting.
Mhm.
So if I know what generalized generation that they were part of and who raised them, because that is part of who we are too, right? You have to take into account where they're from as well. And there is a big uptick too in the cohorts of maybe not everybody has children. There used to be a lot more families used to have more of a focus on having children. Now it's we're seeing a programming that's not quite as focused in on intergenerational program where intergenerational programming where it's your kids coming in, for example. So yeah, you just have to we have to be human. We have to really think about how we can get more into that socialized model and think about how the clinical model has its place where we are for certain people. But the more humanistic we are about how we're approaching learning about our residents and the types of things that they want, that's the key. So I think it is important to know the framework of where they're from, who was in their life, what cohort they're part of, the types of things that really brought them passion. So asking targeted questions to that, like what was the most important thing that happened to you? What is the one thing that you look forward to the most every single time you wake up in the morning?
Mm,
So
I love that. And can you share a memorable example of how learning about a resident's life story influenced the programming or activities that you designed for them? I'm sure you've got
yeah,
a million stories.
yeah. I wish I had prepared more for that question because there are so many. I think I think I'm going to talk about just a resident named Jay. Um, he was one of my very first residents when I decided to go into long-term care. So I had put off working with older folks for as long as I could because I had preconceptions of what working in elder care would be like. And the moment that I made the transition to come and work at Sunrise Senior Living in 2009, I just realized I was at home. And one of my very first residents, and I think most of us will never forget those very first residents that we experience, right? So Jay was one of those. He taught me. He specifically chose the location of that Sunrise Senior Living because it was just down the street from the Museum of Nature and Science, which is where he was a volunteer.
Hmm.
And it was extremely important to him that he could just jump on public transportation and be at his volunteer opportunity as efficiently and economically as possible. And so that was just really eye-opening to me of like, you don't come into an assisted living and just plan to stay there. You're still integrated and part of the greater fabric that makes up that community. Jay also really enjoyed a good happy hour. So you brought up the word happy hour, so that's probably why I'm thinking of Jay. So Jay really, he was a social connector, and there's always at least one or two residents that just bring everybody else together. And that's what he did. So he just inspired me. Just he had a great personality who could make other residents who are nervous about living in assisted living just feel like it was home. So
Mm.
yeah, they would. I taught laughter yoga at that particular community, and they would join my laughter yoga after a happy hour, which was a really great tie-in, right?
Yeah, that's way
It
to set
worked
it
out.
up right there, Heather. Yeah.
It worked out really well. And so they would come in and there's a cadence with laughter yoga where we say very good, yay, and they made up a cheer that says very good, we and they would pretend like they were toasting, so they would carry that same toast into their socials as well. So it's kind of fun to see how they would get inspiration too from the programs.
I love that. Yeah, that's so cool. And it's all about residents like Jay too. I imagine a lot of people listening have got that first resident that they engage with that kind of made them fall in love with this industry and, have decided to not leave. And you mentioned the laughter yoga. I'm curious, have you found any other unique ways to reduce isolation?
Um, I think that person-centered care, just really getting back to that and actually making sure that it's happening, right? So like
Mm,
I think that people use the term person-centered care as like this really great buzzword, and maybe it's happening, maybe it's not really happening. But I think if you're really doing it, your residents, and you're putting the things on that one size fits all calendar, you know what I'm talking about, where like really it's maybe 30 to 40% of your residents that are attending. There's so much more life outside of that one size fits all calendar. I like to call it warehousing your
mm,
residents, right? And it's a regulation. It's a that all states have, that there needs to be just one calendar for, each neighborhood or each division that you're working in, assisted living, memory care, et cetera, skilled nursing. So I think if you're really doing individualized care, you're going to think about what they're doing and what are their independent leisure interests,
yeah.
and really counting that, knowing how to document that. I can geek out on some good data and analytics regarding programming. So I think it's good to know those most important things that somebody wakes up in the morning needing to do, wanting to do, to help them feel like themselves and to make sure it's actually happening. We need to observe it. We need to put eyes on people, make good eye contact. That really helps boost endorphins immediately. I definitely rely on that when we're
Mm,
doing laughter yoga classes, for example. But I think it's just in general a
love
good
it.
technique.
Yeah. And my last question here for you, Heather, which is arguably my favorite besides how people got into the industry, is, if you were to give other senior living providers three guiding principles as they move through the next 12 months, what would you say?
As we move through the next 12 months, ooh, that's a great question. I think that we as an industry need to take care of ourselves. I think that we need to take some deep breaths more often. I think that we need to be human with each other and with our residents, and also look for innovations. Like where are those innovations? And I don't think it necessarily, when I think of innovation, it doesn't have to just mean technology. Although I think technology is a great place to go with it, but I think that innovations in partnerships, um, bringing in maybe some outside folks to help us get a new view, bringing in more of the community, taking folks from the community out into the greater world. Um, but I think if we center more, I'm going to throw out some validation language too. I think Naomi Files validation techniques. I think if people can look more into something like that, that's going to be a game changer in your field. So, yeah.
Love it. Well, Heather, thanks so much for joining us today. I know our listeners will get a lot out of this. I appreciate you and look forward to seeing you on the conference circuit next year.
I know. Which conferences should we go to? What's the best one? There's the good
Uh,
ones.
the ones that are in warm places is kind of my philosophy right now. But um, yeah, I'll be at conferences. I'm speaking at various conferences, so we'll have to connect offline of like which actual ones I'll be at. But yeah,
Okay. All right. Well,
awesome.
cheers. I'll be seeing you at a conference.
Sounds good. Thanks,
Thank you,
Heather.
Matt. I appreciate this.
If you'd like to know when we post the next episode, make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast. If you're interested in how Eversound can help improve the quality of life in your community, find out more at eversoundhq.com.